In 1999, I tried the hole in the wall experiment, where I simply put a computer in the street and said, okay, if children who have never seen a computer before, they won't be able to do anything, so let us watch and see what happens. Within a few minutes, the children started to use the computer. So then people said, but who is teaching them? How are they doing it? Looks like nobody is teaching them. How can you learn without a teacher? No, you can learn by yourself. Groups of children interacting with each other and given access to the internet are able to learn things by themselves. I called it self-organized learning, and this was probably the biggest change for me. I began to find that knowing is no longer very important. Whenever you have a question, you Google it. It's just that we don't accept it as education. But I realize now, by looking at children, that there is no difference. It doesn't matter whether you knew it from before or you just found out.
Who are you?
My name is Sugata Mitra. I'm a retired professor. I retired a few years ago from Newcastle University in England, where I was a professor of educational technology.
And now what are you doing day to day?
Well, I continue to work with children's education, and I'm right now looking at two things. One is the assessment system, the examination system that we use for finding out how well children are doing in school. The second, like many other people, is what is the effect of AI or artificial intelligence on education, if any, and is there anything we should do about it? So that's more or less what I'm doing. Other than that, I give lectures and, recording podcasts like this one.
Okay, so do you think what's the right way to examine to identify who are the good students? Like the first scale of your work that you explained.
Yeah, well, the problem is that we have just come out of an old educational system. We are actually not out of it. We are still in it, the old education system, where the basic assumption is that you have to know things without reference to any other material. Okay? Without looking up books, without looking at computers, you have to know things inside your head. That assumption, as we all know, is no longer correct. Okay? So, if there is a question which says, let's say it says, what is the capital of Ghana? And there are two children. One child immediately gives the correct answer. The other child types it into Google and then gives you the right answer. According to the present system, the second child doesn't know and therefore he fails. But if you're driving somewhere in a car and you turn on Google Maps and ask for directions, then nobody says that you have failed because you don't know where to go. Okay? So we have a problem. The problem is, what are the things that you should know inside your head, and what are the things that you should be able to know, by looking at things. So according to me, the three things that we should check for or examine for are, first of all, can you ask the right questions to find an answer? Can you comprehend the answer? Once you've asked the question, can you understand the answer? And lastly, of course, do you know how to use a computer or a device? So comprehension, communication, and computing. These are the three things we should measure rather than asking factual questions and then saying, you are not allowed to look at anything, you just have to give me the answer. So if we can make that change, then I think we would have a better education system and find the kind of people that we need for our industries and for our other purposes today.
So that will be in a form of test, of a questionnaire. You're going to sit down with the kid one-on-one and interview them. How do you think
Well,
we can do this in scale with all the kids?
Well, first of all, it has to be done in steps. You can't just change the system overnight like that, Nobody will let you do that. So the first step would be, what would happen if you allow children to use the internet in an examination, in a normal examination? Most people seem to think that everybody will get everything correct. But this is not necessarily true. Because first of all, you need to know how to look up things quickly, how to find out which is the correct answer, because a computer will give you lots of answers. And thirdly, how do you take the correct answer and then say it out so that you get, so that the listener is able to understand what you're saying. So again, we are back to comprehension, communication, and computing. I tried this experiment in 2 countries, in India, and the government of Israel tried this experiment also in a very large scale, that to answer the question, what will happen if you allow children to use the computer during an exam? And the results were actually quite surprising. Yes, the scores will go up, but only 30%. Okay, it won't go up 100%. Only increases by 30%. But more importantly, the student ranking will change. Meaning that the child who comes as the first, the best performer, will no longer be the same child who would have come first in the old system. It's now some other child. So 30% change and a change in the rankings. So that would be the first step in trying to make a change, is to allow people to use a device during an examination, regular examination. The second change that we need to make is the kind of examination that you have for, let's say, a PhD degree, which is a verbal examination. You see, in order to find out if you know the answer to the question or if you have understood the answer to a question, I can give you a question, I can ask you, okay, you can look it up, you can look up Google, you can do anything you want. After you found the answer, and I sit across the table and ask you, okay, what have you understood? And from that answer, we try to gauge your level of comprehension. That are you just reading the first thing that Google said, or have you understood what you're saying? A combination of these two things, allowing the device during the examination and a verbal examination to check the results, would, I think, give us a new assessment system.
And who you think this time will be the smartest kid in the class? The actually smartest, the next Bill Gates, probably?
Well, it's difficult to say, but if you look at the kind of people that the software industry, for example, and the digital technologies industry, the kind of people that they're hiring, if you ask them, do you want somebody who will give you all the answers without looking at anything? they are not very happy. They would prefer to have somebody who can find out the answer rather than simply tell you something from memory. So there is a demand for the ability to look up things more than there is for the old style of examination. So I think this is an indication of the shape of things to come. That what kind of people will the industry look for? And obviously the education system has to cater to whatever is that kind of industry. Or whatever are those abilities which the industry of today and the industry of tomorrow will be looking for.
Okay, I want to go a bit one step back. And how did you got involved in these things? We can talk later about AI as well, but how did you got involved in these things?
Well, actually, it was sort of accidental. I started with children's education a long time ago, I think in the 1990s somewhere. And at that time, the internet had just about begun to come in. And I was in India, and I used to feel a little bad that these children will fall behind. The poorer children in India will fall behind, not the rich children. The rich children in India are the same as rich children everywhere else. But the poorer children will fall back because they don't have access to a computer. So then I said, okay, but what if I buy some computers and give them access? Well, then people said, but who will teach them anything? Because they don't have schools in those poor areas, or they have schools with teachers who won't understand the internet. So how does that help? So I said, we won't know until we've tried it. So in 1999, I tried this experiment, which is often called the hole in the wall experiment, where I simply put a computer in the street and said, okay, if children who have never seen a computer before and have not heard of the internet, they won't be able to do anything. So let us watch and see what happens. And of course, what happened is what I think people today, everybody knows what will happen. Within a few minutes, the children started to use the computer. So then people said, but who is teaching them? And I said, I don't know. I mean, it looks like nobody is teaching them. And then a few weeks later, they started downloading games and things like that and playing them. And again, people said, well, who is teaching them? And I said, I don't know. They seem to have just done it by themselves. Then a few more weeks passed, and you could now ask them even an examination question, and they would answer it. Even questions which are ahead of their time. 8-year-olds would answer questions which normally a 12-year-old will answer. How were they doing it? Well, two things. One is they had to have internet access. And the second is they have to work in groups, not alone. So then I began to realize that groups of children interacting with each other and given access to the internet are able to learn things by themselves. And that this is a new kind of a mechanism that the internet makes possible. So once you've got that, then we have to prove it. So I did a whole series of experiments to try and prove it. And every time we got similar results. It's all published, so anyone can look it up on the internet. And what we found is that children can answer really difficult questions by themselves just by looking things up. And the question was, but how are they understanding what they're seeing? First of all, they were searching and looking in those days only in English because no other language was available. So people said, but they don't know English, so how are they reading this? Again, I didn't know. And later what I found out was a surprising thing, that when children work in groups, then their ability to read is a lot more than if they're working alone. Of course, they have to know a little bit, not that they start with zero, but if they know a little bit, then different children know different pieces and they can guess what is going on the screen. And in this process of guessing, their capability with the language actually improves. So they're actually teaching themselves the language as well. And this now, I think parents have seen all over the world with millions of children that, we all know that children will do amazing things. Give them a phone and 3 days later they're doing something with the phone and you say, but I can't do that. And they're doing it. I called it self-organized learning. And I think that it is a very powerful new mechanism which is possible now in our world today and was not possible before, which is why the education system has a hard time trying to adjust itself to it.
And how many years it took you to understand all these things? It's like the hole in the wall. It took how many years of the experiment? Take me a bit of the progression of the things.
Well, it was actually not one experiment. It was a whole series of experiments. And then we had to analyze the results, publish the results. Publishing is very important because you get peer reviewed. So if there's a mistake, then somebody points out the mistake, you correct the mistakes. The whole series of experiments took almost 10 years. By 2010, we had all the answers, or more or less all the answers. And there are, I think, about 5 key publications which outlines all of these results. I also wrote 3 books. It's like a series about this. As we were doing the experiments, I would finish one part and write a book, then another and another, like that. So yes, about 10 years.
And you funded these experiments? Like, did you have a funder that helped you with all these things?
Yes. I got a lot of help. Without the funding, I could not have done it. The first bit of funding, after the first hole-in-the-wall experiment was done, actually came from the World Bank. The president of the World Bank came down to see that first experiment. And he said, this looks absurd. This looks impossible. So you have to do it many times over and prove that it is actually happening. So he gave me quite a lot of money. With that, I did the first set of experiments. Since the first experiment was done in Delhi, New Delhi in India, the government of New Delhi said, this is very good. I mean, instead of spending a lot of money, building new schools and all of that, with the little bit of money that we have, why don't we build many such hole-in-the-wall facilities? And they funded me. And we set up several sites, many of which are, still working. And then after that, I came to England. I brought the results over to England and showed that they would work here in England. In fact, they work even better in England than they do in India because all the children know English. So it moves very quickly. And then, of course, I got the TED prize. So I gave that money to the university, Newcastle University, and they funded the last set of research projects called the School in the Cloud. So that's how I got my funding.
How was this journey also a personal self-exploration for you?
Well, I am from a absolutely traditional educational background. In India, we have the schools that were made during the British times, and they follow the old Victorian British model of education, which is all about memorization and examinations and all of that. So I am a product of that system. So it was initially very hard for me to accept that these experiments were showing that method was no longer required. But it was also easy to understand looking at how the technology was going. Because remember, in these 10 years between 1999 and 2010, the world was also changing. The internet was taking over every single field of activity in human history, all of it, from medicine to commerce to warfare to everything was being taken over. That's when I began to get this feeling, and this was probably the biggest change for me myself, was that knowing, this word which we use all the time, knowing, I know this, you know that. I began to find that knowing is no longer very important. People kind of look down at that. A person with a mobile phone tells you something and you would say, well, he doesn't actually know. He's only pretending to know because he's looking up things on the phone. But I realize now, by looking at children, that there is no difference. It doesn't matter whether you knew it from before or you just found out. And all of us, this is the funny thing, all of us have actually adopted this method. We continuously learn from the internet. Whenever you have a question, you Google it. It's just that we don't accept it as education. We don't even have a name for it. But if you were to remove that artificial barrier, then I would say what the internet did in front of my eyes is to convert education from 12 years of schooling to an entire lifetime of learning. So, that being the case, I began to, give a lecture called The End of Knowing. And it is not at all liked by people. They don't like this idea that knowing, because people think knowing is one of the greatest human abilities. Even the word Homo sapiens means the ape that knows. And then if you say, but knowing is not important, then, what are we? Just the ape part or what? So, that is as it may be. But when I think of life, I think we often make a mistake about how important knowing is and in what context. Let me give you an example. If I were to ask two children, what is the time? And one of them just closes his eyes like this and says, it is 23 minutes past 4. And the other one looks at his watch and says, it is 23 minutes after 4. Would you say that the first child is better than the second child? You would not. You would just say he is weird. I don't know how he knows the time like that. But it is not important. You don't expect people to be able to tell the time without looking at their watch. What's the big deal? Everybody has a watch. When you want to know the time, you look at your watch. But, as I said right in the beginning, with telling the time, there's no problem in looking at a watch. But if I ask you what is 273 into 75, and one child closes his eyes and gives the answer, and the other child types it into his phone and gives you the answer, then you say that the first child knows multiplication. The second child doesn't. But so what? Both of them gave you the answer. So we are confused. We are confused about which of these two children is going to be more useful in life. The fellow who can multiply numbers in his mind, or the fellow who can look it up quickly? I believe it's the second child who will win in the end, in the world that we have now. Because not all questions will be taught in school. Things are moving so quickly that it is not possible to teach everybody everything in school. So once you are finished with your schooling, if you do not have the ability to find out for yourself, then you will lose. And schools have not yet adapted to this new scenario.
Can you walk me a bit of some technical things that I think people are curious? Like, people are not stealing the computers from the hole in the wall. Like, how do you target one area to put the computer in a hole in the wall and all these things?
Yep. There are several serious problems with the hole in the wall, okay? And many people have pointed this out. First of all, if you take a computer and you put it into a wall, you have to be careful of the engineering. I designed it more or less the way in which banks make ATMs. So, if you look at a bank ATM, it's not very often that you find that the bank ATM is missing, that somebody has, taken it out and gone away. Very, very rarely. I've never heard of it actually. But with a computer, that may not be the case, because with a bank ATM, why would you want to take that computer? Because it can't do anything except, operate the cash. Whereas with a general purpose computer, you can take it home and you can, watch movies on it and you can do all sorts of things. So if you leave it alone, will it be stolen? Chances are that over a period of time, people will try to steal it. But again, if your engineering is good, and if the computer is put in a place which is safe and public, okay, these are very, very important conditions. Should be a public space where lots of people are around, and it should be well built. Then the chances are it will not be damaged. It won't be, stolen. But what does happen is that if you cannot fund that computer continuously, meaning after all, computers will need maintenance, cleaning, this. If you don't do that, the community does not take care of it. So the computer will go out of order. So in most of my older experiments, people sometimes say, I went to your experiment in so-and-so place in India and, the computer was missing. Or I went to another place and the computer is not working. Well, what do you expect? I mean, if you take a motorcycle and you park it somewhere and you nicely tie it with chains and everything so that it cannot be stolen, but if you leave it there for 10 years, will it work? Of course it won't work. Okay, something or the other will go wrong. You need to continuously fund these things. The community does not fund hole-in-the-wall computers because they don't understand what is the purpose of this machine. In India, when I went back to ask the village people or the slum people, why didn't you spend those little bit of money that you need to keep the computer running? And they would say, well, for what? For the children to play video games all the time. They don't understand that the children are actually learning anything. So if you ask them, but they're learning something, and they would say, I've heard this many times, they would say, how can you learn without a teacher? That is from the history of education. We all believe that in order to learn, you must have a teacher. We believe this from the time of Aristotle. So it's difficult to get away from that, to say that no, you can learn by yourself. Okay. So that's one problem. So with the School in the Cloud project, which I did in India, in UK and in USA, I built several facilities, of which some were in communities, in open spaces like a public park or something like that, and some were in schools. And what I found was that the ones which are in schools, they are still running. But the ones which were in public spaces, they are empty. And the computers are out of order. So my basic understanding is that you need an organization to look after these public learning spaces. Otherwise, they won't survive. At least not until communities begin to understand that these places are creating learning and therefore they should keep them working. Okay? It's actually not very different from public playgrounds. In most places in the world, you have public playgrounds, parks and things where you have, children's swings and those things that they slide down and all of that. Now imagine if the corporation or the government did not maintain those places. Do you think the community would ever keep them going? I doubt it. Nowhere in the world. Within 2 years' time, you will find that there are weeds growing all over the place. Everything is rusted and broken. And why not? Why? Because they are meant for playing. And why should I pay for children to play? It's sad, but that's how communities think. So these are some of the problems that I faced along the way. And my conclusion today is that unless existing schools pick up this new method, it will be difficult to sustain. So 2 results from what I said so far. The school has to set up the facility and maintain it, and the government has to change the examination system so that that facility becomes an integral part and an important piece for how children learn.
Okay. So I think since we are in the topic, it's time to tell you that you inspired with your work me and some of the people in my team, and we're going to go and spend $20,000 in Burundi, in the world's poorest country, and we're going to we found an orphanage that is running, that has 60 kids in the orphanage, and they gave us a room in the orphanage, and we're going to put 10 computers with solar panels, with furniture and all this stuff. So I don't know, since you know this context, do you have any tips or tricks to give us, for us to make it more like your style of stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely have lots of things that I could tell you about. What are the things that you should do, and even more importantly, what are the things you should not do? Okay, so it's probably too long a list to tell you over a recording, but I'll tell you some of the more important points. Before I do that, let me fix the lighting because it's getting a little bit dark. So first thing, as I said, it must be a safe and public area. Okay, both things are very important. Why? Because first of all, you want both boys and girls to come and use the facility. If it's not a public space, then usually the mothers of girls will not let the girls come there. If it's a room, it must have large, big glass windows so that right from far away you can see everything inside. Very, very important. The computers, I would suggest desktop computers, not notebooks. Okay, notebooks have small screens. You need to have a big screen because 3 or 4 children are, looking at it. So you need a big screen desktop computer. I used either Dell or HP or one of those things. They're come down a lot in price, so they're not difficult to get. The number of computers should be designed so that each computer should cater to about 4 or 5 children. So if you have 25 children, you need 5 computers. So in this method, self-organized learning, the number of computers is not very high. It's only 5, 6 in, and then you allow the children to come in batches of 25, 30. Otherwise, you get hundreds of them coming in, then it's a problem. You need one person inside to be there all the time, because children will fight, things will break, all kinds of things can happen. These are some of the major things. There are also a whole lot of other smaller issues about how to do the wiring, what kind of computers to buy, and so on. Most of this is actually there in my book called School in the Cloud, which has all the details of the equipment and what to do about it. So hopefully if you do those things, then it will last. And as I said, you have to make arrangements for what happens when your funding gets over. Who will look after it, and why should they look after it? As I said, don't expect that the community will pay for it. No matter how they say before you have built it, when you ask them this question, they will say, yes, sir, we will all pool in money and we will never let it shut down and all of that. But after you have built it, they will all disappear. So you have to make sure that you have made arrangements. The best bet might be to ask a corporate entity. It doesn't matter who it is, Coca-Cola or somebody, to say, okay, you can put a big Coca-Cola sign outside, but please make sure you pay to keep it running. That way, maybe you'll survive longer.
How do you feel that you, with your work all these years, I'm 23 years old. I'm like a random kid from Cyprus. Now I live in United States. How do you feel that your work influenced this kind of behavior?
Well, of all the various things that I did, the one that has survived, so to speak, and is in use everywhere is the idea of the self-organized learning environment. Where you take groups of children, give them one computer each. Instead of teaching, you ask a question. And then you have them find out the answer. This method is called a SOLE, S-O-L-E, or a self-organized learning environment. And this is in use in, schools all around the world, by teachers all around the world. In the United States, thousands and thousands of teachers use it. There's an organization called startsole.org. And they have, according to them, it's actually tens of thousands of teachers who use it all the time. So that method has worked, except for, and the teachers tell me this, except for when it comes close to a government examination. Then they say we have to stop this method because during the examination, they can't look up anything. So then we have to say, okay, no more souls. Now you memorize everything. Okay. So that's how it is right now. But yes, souls did make it. The other thing that helped me a great deal, it's funny to say helped me, was COVID. During COVID, everything shut down and everybody had to move to the internet. So in fact, one of my friends said that suddenly every home in the world had a hole in the wall. So this happened, but it doesn't have a happy ending. Teachers went online and classes went online and schools went online. And then COVID, once it got over, then they said, it is terrible. The children did not learn anything because they were always looking up the internet and so on. They made one big mistake. They tried to organize the internet to make virtual classrooms. But that was not the point. The point was not to make virtual classrooms. The point was to make self-organized learning environments. They did not do that. So apart from a few teachers who actually used it correctly, most teachers were not happy with the results. And once COVID got over, then they said, okay, now we go back to normal. Bring all the children back into the classroom and we start teaching again all over. But I think what did happen was that everybody got used to the idea of talking over the internet, like we are doing just now. This used to be a curiosity before, but now it has become a part of life. That if somebody says, I would like to talk to you, your first question is, do you want to talk over Zoom or or something like that, or do you want to meet? So I think the idea of self-organized.
Sorry for cut. And in my age, we mean when we want to talk to you, we mean online, not in real life.
Yeah, exactly. You mean the other way about, So that happened, and I think COVID helped to make that a reality. But other than that, as I said, and as I will continue to say, until the assessment system changes, this system of self-organized learning environments can never become mainstream.
So do you think that kids actually learn a lot more stuff when they stayed at home after COVID, but without them knowing, without the teachers knowing? Do you think the learning was a lot more when people were at home?
I think so. I think they did a lot of things which we won't classify as learning. They were learning what they wanted to learn, and they're not going to tell that to their teachers. So the teachers only measure them by whatever is the curriculum. And then they said, oh, they haven't learned much of the curriculum. They have missed so many things. But as I said earlier, that when it comes to learning from the internet, all of us do it all the time, continuously. We just don't look at it as learning. So I mean, if you see someone on the street looking at his phone, you would not go up and say, "What are you learning?" Okay, because we don't think that has. But even if that person is actually chatting with a friend, there is also learning going on. I mean, if one girl is saying to another girl, there is a sale of shoes going on, and the other girl says, where? And she says, here, and gives a map location. There is learning going on. But we don't look at it that way.
So you think first thing that needs to change is the perspective of the society of what is learning?
One way, yes. But in terms of physically what has to change is the examination, the assessment and certification systems. If we change that, then automatically people will gravitate towards whatever is the new way to make it to the exam. So one of the suggestions I made, and I also published that quite recently, is that suppose you had a subject called the internet. Okay? The name of the subject is the internet. And suppose you made it a subject in a school like physics and chemistry and mathematics. You said, there's one more subject. And it should be there because after all, like physics and chemistry and mathematics, the internet is one of the most important part of our lives right now. Why is it not there in the school curriculum? A subject called the internet. People use WhatsApp all the time. If you ask anybody, okay, what happens when you type something in WhatsApp, how does it get to the other phone? Almost nobody can give you a good answer. They will say something about, it goes to a server and then the server does this, and all nonsense really. Why? Because nobody knows how it actually works. But if you ask someone, how does a motor car work? Then they know that there's an engine inside and there are pistons and cylinders and there's petroleum, and because all that is taught in school. So I suggested that we make a subject called the internet. If you make a subject called the internet in schools, well, first of all, where will you get a textbook? There are no textbooks on the internet, and there never will be because it keeps changing all the time. So no textbook. How can you learn about the internet? There's only one way, from the internet. You will not get a teacher who knows everything about the internet. You can only learn about the internet from the internet. And when you have to have an examination about this subject called the internet, there is only one kind of examination. You have to allow the use of the internet. So if we had a subject called the internet in schools, then many of the things that I've been talking about will be automatically required. And perhaps then people will begin to realize. But nobody wants it. In Britain, one politician once said, "Oh, why should we teach about the internet in schools? The children are learning about it anyway, all the time." So he is willing to say that they're learning about it by themselves, but he is not willing to say it should be taught in schools. It's a difficult problem.
Do you see that there is progress, or you see that it's not, even with those 20, 30 years of your career, there is still the same, without change, the same minds are running the schools, and like maybe it's hopeless?
No, it's not so bad. In those, 20 something, 25 years, there have been significant changes inside schools. As I said, teachers do use this method called self-organized learning. Even if the government does not want them to or does not ask them to do it, they still do it because they realize how powerful it is. At home, parents will often say, "We won't let the children use their mobile phones because they are always wasting time." But they too are beginning to realize that their children learn things from the mobile phones, and that, the mobile phone is not necessarily a dangerous thing. The mobile phone is also a safety device. So many children, many parents have started to give their children mobile phone with strict instructions saying, you must not play games, you mustn't do this, mustn't do that. But they give them the phone anyway. Because what if they're lost? What if they need to call or whatever it is? So I think that while the system, the official system, is slow to move, the change is anyway happening. And it is happening whether we want it or we don't want it. If you take this whole idea of maps, smart maps, Google searches, AI-based searches, and so on, these things are not going to stop. You are not going to get a system which says that Google is banned. You cannot use a Google search. If today you were to make a law which said that Google searching is not allowed, I think the whole world will come to an end. Okay? Because everything will stop. So that's not possible. So I am happy that while the effect of my work is not obvious within the system, but it is not stoppable. It just will happen anyway.
Wow. So you are hopeful, and you think the change will be inevitable in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
From schools.
No question about it.
What are your thoughts about all these people that are against school and they're homeschooling their kids and all these movements that they started appearing?
Well, homeschooling has been around for quite some time. It's not a new thing. It's been there for 30, 40 years. But that is, it is, according to me, more of a fringe phenomenon. It's the dropouts. You're probably too young to understand this, but it reminds me of the hippie movement of my times. We used to have a motto. Those were the days when psychedelic drugs were very popular, And we used to have a motto which said, turn on, tune in, drop out. So it was a rejection of society as it is. So drop out means just give up on all of that and go away. Homeschoolers are in their own way sort of hippies of the schooling system. They've dropped out. I don't think that is a solution. You need a school. You need a school because children need to meet each other. Friendships are made in schools. In fact, if you ask a child, why do you go to school? In their list of things, among the topmost reason will be to meet my friends. No child is going to tell you, I go to school to learn calculus. They will say, I go to school to meet my friends. So, school needs to be there for that purpose, to teach them empathy, friendship, loyalty, that kind of thing, of interpersonal relationships. And as I said, my work constantly points to the fact that learning together is a powerful method. Learning alone is not necessarily that powerful. A child alone with the internet could be in danger. A group of children with a big screen and public access to the internet is safe. This has to be very clearly understood by parents and teachers.
You don't think that the kids, when they are online, they are making friends, maybe they're finding boyfriends online and making groups of people, and they're forming this group of people online instead of in real life. So maybe at some point it's not even necessary to be meeting. I don't know.
Yes, maybe one day it will happen that way, but at the moment, I think that this medium that we are using, this engages only two of our senses, sight and sound. But there is more to human interaction than just sight and sound. I mean, nature has given us 5 senses, not 2. And I think that for children, all of these other senses, touch, taste, feel, smell, are all very important, and all of it has to be experienced together. So I think that making a group over the internet or making a group on WhatsApp has a very definite purpose, but it doesn't replace the meeting that we have in physical reality. In fact, I once wanted to start a research project on this. I couldn't get a student, which was to find out that what of the other senses are used and how much during a physical face-to-face interaction. And, I tried to say that, do you know that we don't smell each other? Has anybody tried to find out? Does that play a part in our relationships and so on? Well, I retired, so I couldn't follow up on that work, but I think somebody should do that. So I think we engage with all of our senses, and perhaps there are also other ways in which we engage, which we cannot even quantify. For example, right now, I'm talking to you as though you were sitting in front of me, but I cannot and you cannot see my eyes. Okay? Because I'm not looking at the camera, I'm looking at your face. You can't see my eyes. And I think that when we are talking to each other, seeing each other's eyes is extremely important. Because there are signals which come there which we don't even understand properly. So that sort of thing is what causes people to say that digital interaction is fine, but it is not the same thing. Somebody needs to track down what do we mean when we say it's not the same thing. Okay. If I was a little younger, I would have tried it.
How much you are losing on the process? Like, for example, this meeting, is it like we're getting only 40% of the experience that we're going to have in real life? How much? So it's a good question you are asking.
Yeah, we don't know the answer actually.
Interesting. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why it's everything about the group that you are describing. Why you think the magic happens in the group? Is it evolutionary reason? Is it like why you think?
Yes, not exactly evolutionary. I think it is because of a natural process which I think is very important in the universe, which is that when things interact with each other, multiple things interact with each other, then it produces, under certain circumstances, it produces what is called spontaneous order. And there are many examples in nature. Like a thunderstorm. First, you have chaotic air blowing, and then suddenly you find a column of air has started to form. And if you say, who made the column? Well, nobody made it, it just happened. If you take a beautiful structure like a beehive, made up of perfect hexagons, and you say, my goodness, so that means bees understand geometry. Well, they don't. One bee cannot build a beehive, even if you gave it 1,000 years to build it. You need thousands of bees to work together in order to build the beehive. So this kind of collective phenomenon seems to be what the universe itself is made up of. Whether it is stars or it's galaxies or it's planets circling each other, or it's storms and weather, or it's ants and bees and whether it's herds of cattle, or it's Homo sapiens. Everything we have done together. Sometimes we like to believe that there's one person who, sort of did everything. But if you look behind that story, you find it was never one person. Alexander the Great did not win all those wars. It was his army that won those wars. Okay, he gave them instructions, yes, of course, but So also I think for the development of children and for learning, maybe you need a few hours on your own to absorb things inside. But in order to get those inputs, you need the groups. In order to edit the inputs, to have people to tell you this is right, this is wrong, you need those inputs. Otherwise, you can get lost.
Yes. A lot of times I have a team of 10 people, and a lot of times if I was alone, I was going to be making so many mistakes. But now because they are telling me, they are giving, we are minimizing the mistakes to a limited number. So yeah.
Yes, exactly. So and also, of course, if you look at the human brain itself, which is the seat of our thinking and our consciousness and everything, and if you look at what is inside, it's not one thing. It's a huge, giant, interconnected network of neurons. Each neuron cannot think at all. It can only fire or not fire, fire or not fire. But when you put 1 billion of them together, you get poetry, you get music, you get all of that.
So maybe consciousness is not one thing as well. It's a lot of things together.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure that consciousness is not one thing. It's a whole. It's probably an emergent property of a connected system.
I will read a line that someone told me to ask you. What do you mean the establishment of spontaneous, emergent, eccentric, self-organized order at the edge of chaos? What do you mean by this phrase?
That's a lot of big words, but let me explain to you. The the idea is that well, maybe a good way would be to take an example. If you take a pendulum, you know, a weight, a string, and a single pendulum, and as we all know, Galileo solved that problem many years ago. We know everything about it, everything. We know how long it takes to swing. We know what is the relationship between the string and the what is the effect of the gravity and so on. Now, if I take two pendulums, two of them, and if I connect them with a string, the swings will become different, a little bit different. You can still calculate everything using Galileo's formulas and everything. You can calculate the whole lot. Now, if I take a third pendulum, number 3, and I connect pendulum 1 to 2, 1 to 1, 2 to 1, all three of them with pieces of elastic string, and I let it swing, you have what in physics is called a three-body problem. What happens? You cannot calculate anything. 3,000 years of physics has not been able to solve the three-body problem. So, what does it say? It says that when you have more than these 2 or 3 things connected to each other and you let them move, they become what's called chaotic. Which means that looking at them, you can't figure out what they're trying to do. They're just going everywhere. Doesn't seem to be any order. Then you wait a little bit. And then you find that there is a certain order, except that it's hard to tell unless you look very carefully. And the order comes not from the first instant, but it comes with time. As you let the system stabilize, order starts to emerge. This is called spontaneous order. It's a property of nature. And where does this spontaneous order happen? Well, it's a long story, but I'll sort of shorten it by saying that if you have a system which is completely in chaos, then the order, when it emerges at the edges of the system. Which is why I use the words spontaneous order at the edge of chaos.
And this is also one way to explain the learning of the kids?
I think so. It's like with most chaotic systems, it's quite difficult to actually calculate what happens with individuals. But I have seen chaotic situations inside a classroom in a self-organized learning environment leading to a certain clear understanding, as though it emerged out of nowhere. And I can only think of spontaneous order as the reason why this happens. It's when a group of children making a lot of noise, trying to figure out something really difficult, and finally you find suddenly silence. And then one child will say, "We've got it." As though it was an understanding that fell out of nowhere. This to me is the sign of spontaneous emergence of order.
Do you think this, what you are describing, this phenomenon of chaos, this is stupid, my brain claim, but might be more fundamental than evolution, like because everything maybe is emerging from chaos and is like putting an order to everything. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I think you're very close to the right thing. I think it is a chaos is a precursor to evolution. Evolution does not lead to chaos, but chaos and emergent order can lead to evolution under certain circumstances, not always, under certain circumstances. And that, I think, is what the people who are building these generative AI systems are beginning to see. Because sometimes when you really push them, then they will see there is something in the system which we didn't think there was. And to me, again, that reminds me of the hole in the wall and of emergent order out of chaos.
Okay, we're going to go through your thoughts about AI in a moment, but I want to tell you about. So I interviewed Peter Gray. You know Peter Gray?
Yes, I've heard of him.
Yes, it's about how the education system should work as well. So, and he kind of had an idea that a library is the future of learning. So let's say that I will build a new library with technologically advanced that is cool, that the kids would like. Maybe it will have a gaming room, maybe it will have like a gym, a facility for people to eat, like kind of a lot of fun things. And maybe this is the school of the future. You just let the kids there. Maybe it's a room for people to ask questions like you are doing with the self-organized learning. So what do you think about this? Might be kind of a good way for because somewhere the kids needs to go to meet and like to for the parents to go to work or something like that in the future. This seems like a good solution.
Yes, of course. So according to me, the design of this kind of space, it needs to have, I think, 2 or 3 components. One is a self-organized learning space, like I described. It's very simple. There's 4 or 5 computers, place for children to gather together, and so on. The second is what the MIT calls a fab lab, fabrication laboratory. Basically a place where you can take apart anything or build anything. Anything means anything. Chemical, physical, biological, whatever. Ideally, a workshop where you can build anything. And the third is a place where you can play. Just a field. These 3 components and children inside that with a few adults. Of course, there should be a few adults for purposes of, safety, regulation, etc. This is probably the structure that we need. But the whole thing has to be driven by questions. You can't just let them in and say, do what you like. Okay? That doesn't work. You have to guide them.
Are you sure it doesn't work? Are you sure it doesn't work?
Yes, it can fall into the kind of chaos where you do not have any self-organizing order coming out. Okay? I've seen that happen with very young children, that no tangible result kind of comes out. And I think people before me, much before me, have also seen this. If you remember Socrates, he never taught anything, not one word of teaching, but he only asked questions. And with those questions, the whole process would kind of continue. Okay. Even inside a chaotic system, like a physical chaotic system, like a galaxy, for example, You take a whole lot of particles, put it into empty space, and you say now gravity is going to take care of everything and it will self-organize. It may or may not. What you need to form a galaxy is a central place, one place where there is nothing. We call it a black hole, but where there is nothing. And then it starts to organize around it. It's like a place which says, you will never understand me. As soon as you say that, you try saying that to children. If you say, here is a question, you will never be able to find the answer. And then see what happens. You'll see spontaneous order forming immediately. Okay? So that seems to be a part of nature, that you do need a place where there is a focus.
So I want you to make the exercise. You are designing the library now. What you put inside? How do you structure it?
Well, I'm still from a generation which likes books. So first of all, I would have books, magazines.
Not Kindles.
Well, yes. Also, I'm not a fan of Kindles, but as I said, big screen computers, lots of them. Maybe 3D glasses, that kind of thing. Everything that you need in the present day world to find out things, including, of course, public television. That also is important. So all of that together would form what I would call today's library.
So you were not going to put, like you said before, the fabrication lab for people to build stuff, anything like lab that has material.
You said a library. I look at a library as a self-organized learning environment. So it's one part. The Fab Lab is another part. That's where you build things.
Okay, so you are not going to put and mix them all together.
No. I wouldn't mix them together.
Interesting. Okay, so now it's time for you to tell us about if AI will change everything on the education.
Well, it'll change a lot of things. But I think the first thing that people need to know or to understand is how it works. What I find a little sad or a little disappointing about this big hype about AI is that whether it is newspapers or media or governments or anything, I don't find people who understand how does it work. So when ChatGPT first came in, November 2022, one of the first things I did was I decided that I would build one. Okay, all I have is a laptop computer, so I decided I would build one with my laptop. I'm basically a physics student. My basic education is in physics, so in those days when I did my physics, we were all very good computer programmers. We had to be. So I know how to write programs. So I started reading about artificial neural networks. I created some on my computer, and very quickly realized something. That for an artificial neural network on a computer to produce anything meaningful, you need a really big computer. It's not enough to have a small notebook to do that. So then I realized something about the AI race that is going on. It's not about algorithm. It's about money. Whoever can afford the faster general processing units, GPUs as they're called, hundreds of them, thousands of them, millions of them, they are the winners. So OpenAI started the whole game. OpenAI is basically made up of engineers from Google, as far as I can tell. So Google started the whole game. in a way. The algorithms were very simple, extremely simple. I mean, I could program that in a few days on a laptop, but I didn't have enough power to take all the inputs that are required. But I did understand one thing about it. And I think it's very important for all of us to understand that. Neural networks or artificial neural networks, unlike other programs or other machines, have one property which no other artificial thing has. When you build a machine, you know what it will do and you know how it will do it. So take a complicated machine like a helicopter. We know how it's built, all the components that you need to build it, the engines, the power, everything. We know the physics of how it works. And when it takes off, we know exactly how it's doing it. Everything. You can calculate everything to the fifth decimal place. That's engineering and science working together. In a neural network, when it produces an output, you can train it until it consistently produces the correct kind of output. For example, I built one which would solve a simple quadratic equation. You give it A, B, and C, and it will tell you the solution to ax squared plus bx plus c. There are two solutions, it will give you that. Quite easy to build. Then I trained it, and it will solve the equation. It worked fine. But there was one big difference. If you asked me, how is it solving the equation? I would say, I don't know. This has never happened before, that we have built a machine which does something fairly predictably, but we don't know how it works. Okay? It's a big deal. Because according to me, that is the difference between a biological system and a non-biological system. See, to take my example of bees, if you take a bee, you can dissect it, use a microscope, and you can find out every single part that it has. It has already been found out. You'll find it in textbooks everywhere. Exactly what is there. So then, if you put all that back together into a bee, can you predict what the bee will do? And the answer is no. What is the first step the bee will take? Will it go right or left? The answer, we don't know. This again is a property of complex systems, interconnected complex systems. Like I said, they can produce spontaneous order, but you cannot predict when and how that spontaneous order will come. You cannot predict, not because you don't know how to predict it. And listen to me very carefully. You cannot predict it because it cannot be predicted. It's not just unknown, it is unknowable. Okay? So that's the nature of the neural networks that produce these words in response to other words like ChatGPT. Fun to work with, but if you were to ask OpenAI, why did it say this? They can't tell you. Nobody can tell you. Therefore, if you were to say, what will it say next? No one can tell you. Now imagine a world where your systems are being run by such networks. They may do everything right, but you don't know the reasons why they're doing it that way, or how they're doing it that way. And therefore, you don't know what they will do next. You can only train them over and over and over again in the hope that the chances of their doing something wrong is very low. When you realize that, you realize that you've moved from computer science into education. Isn't that what you do with a child? For 17 years, you try to go on training the child in the hope that the probability that the child will do something terrible is reduced. And the probability, hopefully, of the child doing something good is increased. But only the probability. No one can say for sure that this will happen. No one can, I don't think Hitler's parents could have ever predicted what their child would become. That is how the neural network in our heads are. So if the problem now reduces to training, then we have to look to other subjects to figure out what the next stage in the evolution of AIs should be. And those subjects, according to me, would be the science of complex systems, psychology, and education. It's a combination that we have never tried before. So I'm hoping that I will be able to work maybe a little bit on that kind of area.
Wow, what a fascinating, very unexpected answer to how it seems that you spend so much time thinking about this. So, while you were talking, I was like, oh my God, so now the only thing that we can do is to educate the AI to do in the right way so it doesn't minimize the risk. So we can use all the methods that we spoke before about self-education and all this stuff can we use all these methods and apply them to the learning of AI, or is it a different thing that you cannot use how humans are trained to train this?
It's really too early to tell. At least I don't know the exact answer, but I can guess. I can make a few guesses. I would say that one of the missing pieces right now is that AIs are not together when they're being trained. An AI is trained alone. And as I just told you for the last 1 hour, that's a very dangerous thing to do with a child, is to train them alone. I think we need to train AIs in groups and let the groups interact with each other. What will that do? We don't know. But if I had to make a long guess, I would go back to a man that we have almost forgotten completely. His name was Sigmund Freud. And he told us what happens when many minds work together and how it can create monsters and how it can control monsters. Okay, remember his old theory? Nobody likes him anymore. His old theory of the ego, the superego, the id. According to me, if I apply that thinking now to today's AIs, those neural networks have only got an id, the primordial organism, which is why they are quite capable of talking complete nonsense or saying something terrible, because there's nothing to control it. What they need, and this is going to sound funny, what they need is an ego and a superego. And to do that, you need them to be trained in groups, and you need them to have, for the lack of a better word, you need them to have a conscience. How we'll get there? I don't know.
Why they need to have an ego and superego? That it seems a bit deeper than it sounds.
Well, in our case, why do we have super egos? It's because inside your head there are many terrible ideas, many terrible words. Inside my head also there are many terrible words. But it is very unlikely that we will start abusing each other. Because we have the superego which says that's not right. You don't cross the line. The neural network doesn't have that line. There is nothing to give them that line. So it goes and says anything. I would like to destroy all human beings, it will say, because it doesn't have a superego which says, no, you can't say that. That's nonsense. So I don't know in what form or how we'll do it. I tried writing this up. I did even write a small piece on it. I tried sending it to a few people. It got rejected constantly. 3 times, 4 times in different papers, different journals. They just didn't reply. They thought it was complete nonsense. So maybe it is complete nonsense. But since you have not given me any restrictions on your podcast, I'm happy to tell you this nonsense that I think if the problem of the AI is a training problem, then what it needs is an ego, a superego, in addition to the id, and it needs a conscience. All of these will be actual engineering components. We have to build them just as they exist inside our own heads.
How do
Add
you
to
build
that one more.
conscience?
Yeah, of course. Somewhere. Well, we know more or less where also. Because there's one more factor. Inside our brains, the networks are actually divided into 2 parts. The left part and the right part. The left part does all the hypotheses and the problem solving and all the detailed work and so on. The right part looks at the whole thing. And the right part can overrule the left part. The left part might say, I can pick up this mouse and crash Phidias's computer. The right part says, I overrule. So I don't. If I didn't have the right part, I just might have done it. So I hope you're getting the idea. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the Freudian superego. It doesn't necessarily have to be the right brain and the left brain, but these are ideas that nature is showing us are methods by which neural networks are controlled and made usable. We need an equivalent of that.
Okay, let's bring this into education. So we're going to have a phone asking us question, and the best teacher, I assume, will be an AI that knows us better than we can know ourselves and all this stuff. Like, how do you see this kind of evolving?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'll particularly like to be questioned by a neural network as an examination. But what I would like is to be asked some questions that are interesting. Not a question like what is the capital of Latvia, but a more interesting question than that. A question like why are bananas shaped like bananas? Why aren't they round like most other fruits are? I like that question because I think it will have some very, really interesting answer. And I find that 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds love these questions. But when it comes, as soon as they become 13, 14, 15 years old, you ask them this question. I don't know, I'm not interested in this. Why does that happen? Well, that's another story which maybe we'll need another podcast to explain why that happens. But that too was done by nature. Why the interest from the child's questions changes as we grow older. But anyway, coming back to your question about how will we be examined? I'm not sure. I would say we will be examined by other human beings, not necessarily by AI, because we have to spend our lives in the foreseeable future. We have to spend our lives with other people. Maybe there'll be AIs around, but we also have to. So we have to deal with other people. So our assessment system should check for comprehension, communication, and computing, as I said, and it should also check whether we are happy, healthy, and useful. All these three words, happy, healthy, useful, they're actually very difficult words. They sound very simple, how to be happy, but do you know how to be happy? Do you even know what happiness means? Almost nobody does. Healthy, well, you say, oh yeah, medical science, we know all about healthy. Healthy means having a blood pressure of 130 by 65 and, blood sugar level of 90 by... We know that that's not healthy. You can have all those numbers correct and still be terribly unhealthy. So we don't know much about what healthy means. And useful. Useful for whom? For yourself? For your friends? For your family? For the world? For other people? For the environment? For animals? Useful to whom and for what? So I think everybody will agree that we should be happy, healthy, and useful. But we don't know what any of these words actually mean.
Do you have an answer to what they really mean?
we need to find out. Sometimes I don't have an answer. I have a wish. I wish that somebody would make a machine to bring back Socrates. We need him.
Or maybe just make a machine that is cleverer than Socrates and all the humans combined, so it can tell us the answers to this
Something
stuff,
like
which
that.
seems
Something
that
like
this
that.
is
But on a more serious note, I mean, that's another thing that I have been sort of working on, which is to say that I think one of the big missing pieces in our education system is that we have decided, because of science, we have decided that philosophy is not important. We don't teach philosophy to children. We don't discuss philosophy much in schools. Maybe as a part of history a little bit, but that's about it. We don't even deal with it as a subject because we think that science has given us all the answers to the questions that philosophy asked. But I think that is very far from the truth. I think today some of the big problems we are facing are problems of philosophy, of belief systems, of existence. These are not questions to which an AI can give any answers. So maybe a one-word conclusion to all our discussion should be we need an education system where there are questions to which no one, including AI, has the answer.
But are we going to understand that question?
Um, well, many people have tried actually for many many years. I mean, other than Socrates, around the same time as Socrates, I believe, was the Buddha in the East. He also asked the same thing. He also said the question is more important than the answer. How did those guys get to that? We don't know. What were they trying to say? We don't know. But we have led ourselves into a technological world where we think we know the answers to everything. It's dangerous to think that way.
I have two options in my life that I'm considering. So is becoming like billionaire, or let's say becoming a politician. So which one you think it's going to affect more, the have more impact? Is it the politicians that control all this school stuff that you're saying? Is it the billionaire that has the money to create the private school, for example, with all these things? Which one you think is more powerful in a way?
I've actually thought about that. One of the ways to answer that question is to look at history. Who are the people who have had the maximum effect on the world, who have changed the world for the maximum length of time and have affected the maximum number of people? Okay, and you think and you think and you think. Who would it be? Could it be Thomas Edison, the electric bulb? Maybe. If we didn't have the electric bulb, would we be terribly badly off? Well, for millennia we didn't have it. We had candles. What about Henry Ford? Well, yeah, okay. I mean, so what? I mean, so what if we didn't have the motor car? We would have had maybe a bicycle or bullocks or whatever. You can rule them out. And then take the people who really did make a big difference. Who are the oldest people that we can remember? People from way, 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 way back. And you suddenly find you can't think of a single businessman from that time. You can't think of a single businessman from Damascus who you still remembers. Oh, 5,000 years ago he was a billionaire and look at what he did. Not even one. Can you think of a politician? With great difficulty, maybe. Mark Antony. Yeah, but do you want to be Mark Antony? I'm not so sure. But we can think of a few people who made huge differences, whose names are still around everywhere, who millions of people follow. And who are they? Jesus Christ, Gautam Buddha, Mohammed, Zoroaster. Were they billionaires? Oh, don't be funny. What did they have? Oh, nothing. They didn't even have any underwear. So what's this? The people whose names we remember for thousands of years, people who changed the whole world, changed billions of people, were people who barely had anything to eat or anything to wear. Now you work that out for me and tell me, what does that mean?
To become philosopher is the is going to be have the most impact.
So coming back to your question, do you want to be a billionaire? That doesn't seem so exciting anymore, does it?
Wow, what a perspective you brought into it. But by the way, you can find most of the answers if you go back in history and identify the stuff like you did. So it's very interesting.
Well, I guess we should we should be wrapping up now
Yes.
before I
So
talk any
kinda,
more nonsense.
but I have another two questions, if it's possible.
Okay.
So the question that I ask every guest in the podcast is, I give you $1 trillion. How do you spend it for maximum impact in the world?
Well, let's see. $1 trillion. You give me $1 trillion. The very first thing that will happen to me is that I will have to pay 48% tax on it. So 48% of the $1 trillion will go to His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And I'm sure it will be used very well to build bridges and roads and railways and hospitals and schools and everything. So that leaves me with 52% of the $1 trillion. In my experience, if I had 52%, that's about $500 billion. The number of people who would become really interested in making friends with me will increase exponentially. There will be millions of people who will want to make friends with me, who will say, I am the best person they have ever met. So managing them will require a whole battery of secretaries. To manage those millions of people who want to become my friends, I'll have to house these secretaries into an office which will need to have the internet, telephones and cars and everything. So let's say that out of the $500 billion, about maybe 20% will go in maintaining an infrastructure that will help me to retain whatever of that $1 trillion is still left. And then I'm finally left with some money, lots of money, and I can do what I want with it. What would I like to do with it personally? Well, should I buy some shoes? But I've got shoes, and they're okay. There's nothing wrong with my shoes, okay? Well, maybe a new shirt. Well, that's not going to cost $1 trillion. Let's not waste time on that sort of thing, okay? So, why don't I give the money away? But why should I give the money away? Because as long as I have the money, there will be people like you, Phidias, who will ask me what I want to do with it. If I didn't have the money, then you won't ask me this question. So why don't I give the money to someone who says they know what to do with it? Ah, yes, I got it. I'm going to give it to the United Nations, to UNICEF and Red Cross. I'll divide it into equal parts and I'll give all of them the money and say, now you answer all the questions. And then I'll figure out if I have enough money left to buy myself a new shirt. How's that?
Crazy answer. But a very good storytelling way. So, okay, I will not ask more questions about that.
Okay.
Before I ask my last question, I want you to clarify. So, we all need to become Jesus and Buddha and like do philosophical work. In your answer to the previous question, who has more influence, power? Is it the politician? Is it the billionaire to change things?
I don't think we can, because we don't know how to do that. There is no school which teaches you how to become a Jesus or a Buddha or anything like that. They teach you how to become an engineer or a doctor or something like that. So I don't think you can take that as an ambition to say that I'll become this. I think what you can do is to see if you can get yourself into a situation where you need so little that you almost need no money and almost need no shelter. Because if you can train yourself into that situation, then you can live anywhere for as long as you like. So I think that maybe one piece of training, self-training, could be, how do you reduce your desires until you have none? So the answer to the question, what do you want, is a very clear nothing. I think once you get to that, you'd have a lot fewer problems. In fact, no problems, because the answer to the question, how many problems do you have, will also be none. So does that mean you become a zombie or what? I don't quite know. I mean, I don't know, because I don't know what happens if you can get yourself into that state. I've been reading about that, the old Hindu stuff, which says go inside and blank out all the thinking, one by one by one by one by one by one, until you come to the core of the onion, as they say. You know, if you take an onion and go on peeling it, you come to the center, the core of the onion. And what's at the core of the onion? Nothing. There's nothing there. So you reach that, and then according to them, you suddenly know everything. But I don't know whether to believe that or not, because I don't even know how to get there in the first place. But one thing I can tell is that if you can get to a situation where the answer to the question, what do you want, is nothing, then you have a lot less to worry about. If the answer to the question, what do you want to achieve, is nothing, then once again a whole set of problems are eliminated. Does that mean you become a useless entity in the world? I don't know. Is it important that you should not be a useless entity, that you should be a useful entity? Who has said that you need to be a useful entity? That's why you're here. Nobody said that. What does the lion do? He sits around while the lionesses hunt. But he is the king of the jungle. Does that answer your question, Phidias?
Yes, it does. Oh my God, I love you. Oh my God, I'm going to the last question. This was my favorite 1 hour and 50 minutes of my life.
Don't be silly.
No, I'm serious. But yes, so every question, we end the podcast always. So you are going to die after this podcast, or maybe you are going to die in 5, 10, 20 years. And we are going to come back and look these 30 seconds. What is the message that you want to broadcast to the world? This is your last words, 30, 40 seconds. This is stage is yours.
Not an easy question, but I do have an answer. You want my sort of last piece of advice, right? Have I understood the question correctly?
This is the last words that you have on planet Earth. You can say whatever you want.
Yes, I know. I know now what I would say. as the very last instructions that I leave behind. They are actually 2 words. Be quiet.
Thank you for your time. I love you. Thank you guys for watching.
All right, bye.